the rent that needs to be paid at the perhaps 5th day of the month is not available. It's hide and seek games, cat and mouse games with the caretaker, with the landlord. I mean, talk to us about, in the event you find yourself in that space, how can you recover later in the year?
Okay, so first, now you are in the hole. You have overspent the money. You have not paid for bills that you were supposed to pay for.
Yeah.
So if that is your situation, I'd recommend borrowing a short-term loan. And this is the reason I'd ask. In fact, a short-term here is I'm talking about 1 to 3 months loan. And this is the reason. If you borrow a single month loan, it means that you will continue getting deeper into the borrowing cycle. But if you say that, you know what, I will borrow maybe 50,000 that I can now pay within 3 to 4 months, it allows me to pay and continue living. It also, remember, if you pay the first amount, you're not eligible to borrow the full amount. So you avoid falling into the trap of borrowing 50,000, paying 50,000 plus 5,000, then having to borrow 55,000, so you pay and then you never get out of the debt cycle. So if you are going to borrow a short-term loan, make sure that it is an installment loan as opposed to a what we call a consolidated loan, where you're required to pay a single installment. So make sure if you're going to borrow something, maybe as the equivalent of your 1 month salary, and then make sure that it's payable within 3 to 4 months. So that first and foremost, pretend you didn't receive a salary in December, because indeed you've eaten it. So you just need your salary to get back on your feet, and then you need to pay it slowly, so that you do not end up reborrowing the full amount and then never getting out of debt. Yeah.
And now, when schools come, of course, it's a thorny issue. People need to plan. Let's talk about right now, in this month of December. Ideally, before we get to the festive season, what would someone need to be doing in the event they've not been able to save in the beginning, for all the 11 months, and then they're here, they're trying to avoid now that car crisis? What ideally, whereas you're saying it's important to save, do you then refuse not go home? Do you then not rent that car to travel? Do you not then go clubbing or go having a machoma? Are those stopgap measures that you can clearly say, okay, on this one, I'm going to control myself?
I think if I was if I was not in the space of lending, I'd be under the impression that it is possible for me to say, don't go and you stay at home. So first and foremost, if you had already made plans to go and you do not have money, for this one time I will allow you to borrow. But I also want to think about the kind of debt you will get yourself into. So if you get a debt, you need to, I've said, make sure that you take care of 2 things when it comes to debt. When you're required to pay this installment, how much you're required to pay as an installment for this debt. Number 2, how much you have borrowed. So, and what would be the interest rate. So I want you to think about what I've said, the amount you've borrowed, when you're required to pay, the installment amount vis-a-vis what you would typically earn. And then after that, think about the interest rate, because the interest rate will tell us how far deep can you get into that debt, and because if you get a 20% debt, for example, where you get 20% per month, in the period of 4 months, you'll have paid 80%, which is almost double what you borrowed. So if you come to month 3 and discover, you know what, I've paid these people over 100% or over 150% of the amount I borrowed, then you will get mad and decide to default, and then you'll of course get listed with CRB. You have people now calling you to ask you to pay their debt. You have stress. So the best would be, ask yourself 3 questions. Indeed, I will have to borrow. Where am I borrowing from? And that's why I'd recommend lenders who obviously are licensed by Central Bank of Kenya, especially around how they manage customers who have not been able to pay. You'll find that there is a requirement to be humane even as we collect debt. You will find somebody who is willing to talk to you, to be able to advise you, to give you debt collection products, which we call restructure, where if you had borrowed a loan for 10 months, they can actually stretch it to 24 to make sure that the installments are reasonable and you can be able to pay the debt. So that's number 1. Find out who is giving you the money. Then number 2, at what price? Remember, I have said you already planned to hire a car. You've committed to people at Up Country that indeed you will come driving a car. So if you borrow, you need to ask yourself, at what interest rate will I pay this money? And that's very important, because you don't want to get into debt fatigue, a situation where you are tired of paying this loan. Urushe mkono useme, you know what, nimelipa ya kutosha, wanilist kama wanataka, which obviously exposes you to more expensive debts in future. So interest is a very important consideration. Number 2, installment amount. You know, you could even be given a low interest, but the installment amount is a significant percentage of your current income. So maybe you earn 50,000 and the installment is 40,000. It means that you will never get out of debt. So think about the interest, then think about the installment. And that's why you need to ask yourself, if I earn 50,000, maybe I want to spend only 10% of that or 20% of that in servicing a debt. And so that installment needs to be within the 20% range to allow you to live comfortably. Typically, our country, there's a regulation that we don't go beyond a third rule. But being a bit more prudent, I'd say don't go beyond 20% of your income. So that if you have committed 20% of your income to service a debt, this is a debt I know you will not default on. And then, of course, number 3 is after you've done all these things, plan to pay this debt. And the only way you can plan to pay this debt is making sure that the installment dates fall within when you receive your income. So